Emily pulled into the corporate parking lot in her old, faded sedan, its paint chipped and dents telling stories of years gone by. The sun was just beginning to cast sharp shadows on the glass towers of her new workplace, and despite the morning chill, a bead of sweat trickled down her temple. She gripped the steering wheel a little tighter, her mind racing with a mixture of excitement and nerves. Today was the start of a new chapter, her first day as a project manager at one of the city's top firms. The lot buzzed with polished luxury cars and sharp suits, a stark contrast to Emily's unpretentious arrival. She glanced around, hoping no one would notice her modest ride. But Mark was watching. From behind a cluster of Lexus SUVs, he leaned against a sleek black sports car, arms crossed, a smirk curling the corner of his mouth. Mark, a mid-level manager known for his quick judgments and louder-than-life arrogance, spotted the battered sedan before he noticed the driver. "Look at that," he chuckled under his breath, nodding towards Emily's car. "Wonder how long that relic's gonna last here." He gathered a few colleagues nearby and, loud enough for Emily to hear, made a sharp, mocking comment about how people like her didn't belong in a place like this. His voice carried through the morning air. The group chuckled, eyes flicking toward Emily. She paused in the open, heat rising to her cheeks. The sting wasn't just in his words but in the unmistakable scorn that surrounded them. For a moment, she wanted to retreat, to disappear into the shadows of passing executives. But she squared her shoulders, took a steadying breath, and stepped out of the car, ready to face what was waiting inside. Emily adjusted the strap of her tote bag as she stepped into the gleaming lobby, the polished floors reflecting the brisk footsteps of high-powered employees rushing past. Despite the confident posture she wore like armor, a tremor of doubt whispered at the edges of her thoughts. The weight of the morning's encounter in the parking lot lingered, Mark's mocking laugh still echoed in her ears. She wiped her palms discreetly on her skirt and moved toward the elevators, determined not to let one man's scorn define her. It was impossible to ignore, though. Word of the girl with the junk car seemed to trail behind her as she navigated the halls. Whispers, subtle glances, occasional smirks, and the occasional half-stifled chuckle followed her steps. She could feel the invisible barrier forming, a quiet skepticism among colleagues who'd assumed her humble arrival meant she lacked the polish, and perhaps the competence, to succeed here. Emily's plan was to find the new division she'd been assigned to, immerse herself in work, and let results speak louder than first impressions. But fate and Mark had other designs. He caught up to her near the coffee station, fresh cup in hand, sharp eyes alight with the glint of challenge. "Hey, Emily," he said with a voice too loud for just the two of them, "mind if I ask how you managed to land this position driving that car? I mean, even the janitor around here has a nicer ride." Emily's breath hitched slightly. The room had quieted. A few nearby co-workers stopped their chatter to watch the exchange, their eyes shifting between the two like spectators waiting for a match to begin. She looked directly at Mark, steadying herself. "The car doesn't define my work or my qualifications," she said calmly. Mark laughed, cold and dismissive. "Qualifications, huh? You sure about that? I've been here 5 years, and I haven't seen anyone who got the job on looks and hope alone. What's your story, anyway? Just luck?" Some nearby employees exchanged nervous glances, uncertain whether to step in or stay silent. A tall woman nearby whispered, "Bold move, Mark," her tone a mixture of amusement and warning. Emily felt a flush rise to her cheeks but forced her lips into a polite smile. "I'm here to do a job. I'm confident I can." Mark frowned, the smile dropping from his face. "Confidence won't cut it here," he said, folding his arms. "You'll see soon enough." The slashing finality in his tone reminded Emily of the parking lot. He wasn't just joking around. This was a deliberate attempt to undermine her. The murmurs among the other employees grew louder. A few chuckled quietly, others exchanged confused looks. Emily sensed some were wondering if Mark was right. She felt an urge to defend herself further, to stand tall in front of them all, but the sting of humiliation tightened her throat. Instead, she nodded, gripping her cup of coffee a little too tightly. "I have a meeting scheduled on the 12th floor," she said, attempting to retreat from the uncomfortable attention. Mark's eyes narrowed. "You sure you belong up there?" he asked pointedly, gesturing toward the elevators. "Wouldn't want to get lost." Emily forced a laugh, turning to press the call button for the elevator. She glanced back once, catching Mark's expression, smug, triumphant. Later, alone in the break room, Emily sank into a chair and pulled out her phone. She flipped the screen awake and dialed her close friend Jennifer. When Jennifer answered with her usual cheerful tone, it was like a lifeline. "Jennifer, well, it's been a rough morning," Emily admitted as soon as her friend's voice filled her ear. "Tell me everything," Jennifer said, sounding both attentive and concerned. Emily recounted her encounter with Mark in the parking lot and hallway, how his mocking had drawn attention and how isolated she felt by the unspoken judgments hanging thick in the air. "You can't let him get under your skin," Jennifer reminded her. "People like Mark thrive on making others feel small. You're way better than that." "But it's not just him," Emily sighed. "I know the look some people give me. The whispers. I look around and wonder if I really fit in here." Jennifer was silent for a moment before replying with unwavering support. "You wouldn't have this job if you didn't. You belong just as much as anyone else, Emily. You've got something they don't, a clear head and grit. Just wait, you'll prove them all wrong." Emily smiled through her growing fatigue. "Thanks, Jen. I needed that." Closing the call, she stared out the window of the break room, watching people pass below, the city uncaring, indifferent. But inside the building, the undercurrent of tension continued. Mark was making sure of that. By midday, Mark had begun weaving his narrative among other managers, describing Emily as a mistake, a hire made on a whim, someone who wouldn't last the month. His casual remarks escalated to pointed jokes during meetings, undermining her contributions before they even began. During a lunch break, Emily spotted Mark whispering to a group of employees. Their half-smiles and knowing looks conveyed the message clearly: Emily was an outsider. The cumulative effect pressed heavily on her shoulders. She questioned if she'd underestimated the depth of resistance she'd face. But beneath the surface, a quiet resolve began to build. Back at her desk, Emily found a folder with the agenda for a key project presentation scheduled later that afternoon, a project Mark was due to lead. She sat down, fingers poised above her laptop keyboard, heart pounding. Could she rise above the sarcasm, the sneers, the doubts whispered across cubicles? Was she ready to show what she was made of? As the clock ticked towards the meeting, Emily's breathing slowed, muscles tensing with anticipation. Everyone was watching. Mark expected her to falter. But in that charged moment, Emily made a silent vow: she would not be invisible. She would not be dismissed because of appearances or assumptions. She would stand tall and let her work speak for itself. The conference room doors swung open, and she stepped forward into the spotlight. The eyes settled on her, the whispers hushed, and the game was on. And yet, no one guessed that Emily was poised to turn the tables in a way none of them expected. The conference room was filled with the company's leading minds, the air thick with anticipation. Mark sat confidently near the center, smirking and folding his arms, ready to see Emily stumble. The long wooden table was scattered with folders, laptops, and half-empty coffee cups. As the murmurs died down, Emily took her place at the head of the room, standing tall despite the pounding in her chest. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice steady but quiet at first. The room's attention sharpened. "I know there's been some uncertainty about the direction of this project, and I'm eager to present a new proposal that aligns with both our company's goals and the market trends we've identified recently." Mark's eyes narrowed, waiting for her to falter, but Emily had prepared thoroughly. Her laptop projected clean charts, detailed analysis, and a clear timeline that spoke to both innovation and practical application. Her fingers hovered calmly over the keyboard, advancing slides that highlighted her insights and strategy. As you can see, Emily continued, pointing to a graph illustrating consumer behavior changes, our focus on integrating client feedback with agile project cycles will reduce overhead by 15% and increase customer retention by at least 20%. We'll implement milestone reviews to ensure flexibility without sacrificing deadlines. A ripple went through the room. Several executives exchanged impressed glances, their previous skepticism wavering as Emily spoke with clarity and command. Mark shifted uncomfortably but tried to mask it with polite nods. She paused briefly and then dove into a deeper explanation of her team's approach to leveraging emerging technologies, demonstrating an understanding that surpassed the usual surface-level proposals. There was a confidence in her quiet authority, a measured pace that invited questions and engagement. Hands shooting up from the far end of the table, a director asked, "Emily, how do you envision coordinating across departments with these new methods? Particularly given the resistance we sometimes face from legacy teams." Emily smiled, welcoming the challenge. "Great question. I've already begun conversations with department leads and identified key influencers who support this direction. We'll employ cross-functional project teams with clear communication channels and measurable KPIs to track progress and quickly address any roadblocks. Adaptability is key. This isn't a top-down initiative but a collaborative effort." A handful of nods followed, some murmured agreements. The executives leaned in, leaning toward this unexpected candidate presenting such a comprehensive plan. At one point, Mark interjected with a sarcastic edge, "That sounds well and good, but realistically, how does your plan handle the inevitable budget overruns we've seen in similar projects?" Emily met his challenge squarely. "By instituting strict budget oversight at every phase and limiting scope creep through defined objectives, we mitigate those risks. Plus, the projected cost savings from improved retention and efficiency buffer against potential overruns. This plan isn't speculative. It's based on data and coordinated risk management." The room fell silent for a moment, then erupted into questions and discussions sparked by her detailed presentation. Colleagues who had previously dismissed Emily openly debated her ideas, some even nodding approvingly as the meeting unfolded. Mark's smugness dissolved with every minute. His attempts to discredit her publicly backfired, drawing attention to his own unwillingness to adapt. Among the audience, subtle looks exchanged between other managers indicated shifting allegiances. As the meeting concluded, the CEO stepped forward with an open smile. "Emily, that was an impressive presentation. Fresh perspectives like yours are exactly what we need to advance our projects and stay competitive. Thank you for your hard work." The applause was warm and genuine, echoing across the room. Emily's chest swelled with a mix of relief and pride. She glanced toward Mark, whose forced smile barely concealed the shock settling into his features. After the meeting, as people began filing out, several colleagues approached Emily. A junior analyst, previously quiet and reserved, grinned, "Hey, I wasn't sure what to expect, but that was excellent. You've got a real knack for this." Another manager, a woman in her 40s, said, "You handled Mark's jabs like a pro. It's not easy to face that kind of scrutiny, but you showed you belong here." Emily smiled, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the success of the presentation alone. It was the acknowledgement of her capability, the dismantling of silent doubts. Even outside the room, news traveled fast. By the end of the day, several employees had circulated stories of Emily's presentation, praising her expertise and professionalism. Mark's narrative about her being a questionable hire was becoming an inside joke, with some playfully teasing him about underestimating her. One colleague whispered to a friend, "Looks like he really put his foot in it this time." Emily's phone buzzed with messages, supportive texts from Jennifer, congratulatory notes from unexpected colleagues. The tide was turning. But Emily knew it wasn't about vengeance or public shaming. It was about establishing a foundation of respect and showing that appearances could be deceiving. She reflected on the morning's jeers about her old car and felt that old sting dissolve into quiet satisfaction. Mark, meanwhile, retreated into a defensive posture, catching himself glancing at Emily with a mixture of grudging respect and unease. He realized his assumptions, judgments based solely on surface impressions, had cost him his credibility. As he left the building that evening, Mark replayed the day's events, his mind unsettled. The woman he'd mocked with confidence had, in a few hours, entirely reframed how he and others would see her. Emily packed her things calmly, the office lights dimming around her. The hum of computers powered down, but inside, a new energy thrummed. She thought of Jennifer's words from earlier, resilience, focus, and grit, and found them ringing true now more than ever. When she finally stepped into the cool evening, the city lights shimmering around her, Emily felt a quiet triumph. She had entered a room full of doubters and emerged with something stronger, undeniable proof of her worth. Her old car was waiting in the lot, unassuming as ever, its worn seats and faded paint unchanged. But tonight, to Emily, it felt like a medal, an emblem of endurance, of coming through when most expected failure. Mark's laughter from that morning was now a distant echo, replaced by respect too hesitant to voice aloud but growing nonetheless. And Emily, once the target of sneers, now stood at the center of attention, not because of flash or flare, but because she had earned it with quiet strength. The day had tested her, and she had risen. What would you have done if you were in Emily's position? Would you confront the judges or prove them wrong through your work? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe. See you in our next story. As Emily closed the door behind her that evening, the quiet of her modest apartment wrapped around her like a familiar blanket. The day's events swirled in her mind, Mark's sneers, the hesitant glances from colleagues, the sharp contrast between her car and the sleek vehicles in the lot, and yet here, within these four walls, none of that mattered. This was her sanctuary, a place where she was simply Emily, not the woman supposed to prove herself over and over. Few at the office could have guessed the path that brought her here, the years of hard work woven into the fabric of her unassuming presence. The old car she drove wasn't a sign of struggle but choice. Emily had once owned a luxury vehicle, sleek, polished, a symbol of success many chased. But after returning from an intense international project in Southeast Asia, managing a team through a grueling product launch for a global tech conglomerate, she traded it all for something simpler. Her volunteer work in remote villages had shifted her priorities. Material possessions lost their shine against the glaring need for community, impact, and authenticity. She preferred practicality now, gadgets and luxuries traded for meaningful connections and unwavering focus on the work she truly cared about. The beat-up car was a steadfast companion through long days and late nights, a symbol of quiet resilience rather than status. From a young age, Emily had been one to rise above expectation. Raised in a small town with limited resources, she earned scholarships, taught herself coding and project management techniques, and clawed her way into the corporate world. The path had been anything but gentle, filled with doubts from others and occasionally from herself. But every obstacle only reinforced her determination. The sleek offices, corner suites, and glossy cars were all part of a world she knew well, yet it was the substance behind the facade that mattered most to her. Emily's arrival at this prestigious company was a conscious decision, not driven by the trappings of success but by the opportunity to lead meaningful, change-driven projects in a place that could amplify her impact. Her quiet choice to arrive without fanfare that morning, in that old car, was a deliberate act. She wanted to focus on what truly mattered, the work, her leadership, and the results, not on appearances or shallow judgment. Yet, today had revealed how deeply superficial judgments could run in a world obsessed with image. Mark's initial reaction had been a painful reminder of the barriers she still needed to confront, the stereotypes that trapped even the brightest minds in narrow expectations. Back in her small kitchen, Emily poured herself a cup of tea and allowed herself a moment to reflect. The low hum of the city beyond her window seemed distant, replaced by the memories of her years abroad, digging wells in dusty villages, coordinating teams with limited resources, relying on grit and ingenuity rather than status or wealth. Her phone buzzed with messages from colleagues she'd met that day. Some started reaching out to collaborate, eager to learn more about her approach. The support was subtle but growing, proof that the walls of doubt were starting to crack. Yet, the tension lingered. Mark's presence was a reminder that this journey would not be straightforward. She knew her work would be scrutinized, her every move measured against biases she couldn't ignore. But that knowledge only fueled her resolve. She thought about the upcoming weeks, the challenges ahead, establishing cross-departmental collaboration, managing expectations from impatient executives, and proving that real leadership transcended polished appearances. Emily allowed herself a small smile. Despite the obstacles, despite the judgment lingering like a shadow, she belonged here. Not because of the car she drove or the clothes she wore, but because of the vision she carried and the strength she cultivated. Her story was one of steady progress, not a meteoric rise but a purposeful journey. From the scholarship student in a small town to managing complex projects halfway across the world, to now leading a team in this gleaming office building, each step was marked by perseverance. As the city lights flickered outside, Emily felt a quiet anticipation for the work ahead. She was ready, not just to face the doubts of others, but to rise above them entirely. Later that night, as she prepared for bed, Emily looked out over the city skyline. The hum of distant traffic, the glimmering windows across the street, all reminded her that appearances often told only half the story. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but also new opportunities, to redefine perceptions, to inspire change, and to lead with integrity. She drifted to sleep not as the woman judged by the car she drove, but as a leader ready to make her mark on the world. What drives you to persevere in the face of judgment? Share your stories and thoughts below as we continue this journey together. If you've been inspired by Emily's story, make sure to subscribe for more tales of resilience and courage. See you in the next story. In the days following Emily's standout presentation, the atmosphere in the office transformed noticeably. What had been whispered doubts and sideways glances began to shift into nods of acknowledgement and invitations to collaborate. The undercurrent of skepticism that Mark had cultivated now turned into quiet murmurs questioning his judgment, and even his professionalism. It wasn't long before upper management took note. The CEO, impressed not only by Emily's insight but also by her composure in the face of adversity, called a meeting with Mark. The conversation was brief but pointed. Mark's habitual overconfidence gave way to a more subdued tone as he realized the repercussions his persistent undermining had caused. After the meeting, HR informed him that he would be reassigned away from critical projects to a role with less influence on strategic decisions. It was a clear message: the company valued constructive leadership and collaboration over petty judgments and office politics. Mark spent the following days grappling with his new reality. Once quick with cutting remarks and dismissive smiles, he now found himself isolated, his previous assumptions laid bare as folly. The colleagues who had once laughed along at his expense now avoided engaging with him, and even his closest supporters hesitated. Regret settled in, but it was tempered by the realization that his behavior had cost him not just his position but also respect. Meanwhile, Emily's star continued to rise. The completion of her project implementation exceeded expectations, with measurable improvements in efficiency and client satisfaction. The teams she led responded well to her empathetic yet firm leadership style. Her modest lifestyle and practical demeanor only deepened coworkers' respect, a quiet reminder that success wasn't about appearances but substance. Emily found herself receiving not just professional praise but genuine connection. Her emails, once sparse and formal, now included invitations for coffee breaks, brainstorming sessions, and even casual lunch outings. The early barriers dissolved when people saw the person behind the outdated car and simple attire, a confident, talented woman who had earned her place through hard work and vision. One afternoon after a particularly successful project meeting, Jennifer called Emily to celebrate. "I knew you'd turn it around," Jennifer exclaimed. "You showed them what real leadership looks like." Emily smiled, the warmth of the call wrapping around her like balm. "It wasn't easy, but it's been worth it." She thought back to that moment in the parking lot when everything seemed uncertain. The sting of ridicule, the pressure to fit a mold she never intended to inhabit, it was painful but ultimately transformative. "I still drive that old car," Emily admitted to Jennifer, laughing softly. "It's a little dusty, but it's mine. And it's a reminder of where I started and everything I'm working to become." Jennifer laughed. "You're my hero." Emily's vindication wasn't about vengeance, but about the quiet power of resilience and authenticity. She chose to continue living simply, focusing on meaningful work rather than surface impressions. That choice inspired many around her to reconsider their own priorities. For Mark, the experience became a humbling lesson. In time, he reached out to Emily with a sincere apology, acknowledging his misjudgments and the harm they caused. While Emily accepted his words with grace, it was clear that her forgiveness came with a firm resolve to protect her dignity and the space she had earned. The story of Emily's journey, the woman who arrived in an old car to a world that doubted her, then rose to lead with distinction, became a quiet legend within the company. It reminded everyone that success is not about the facade but the strength to persevere, the courage to challenge assumptions, and the integrity to lead with heart. As Emily pulled out of the parking lot one evening, her old car rumbling beneath her, she felt a deep sense of peace. The vehicle was more than transportation, it was a symbol of endurance, quiet strength, and authenticity in a world too often obsessed with appearances. What would you have done if you were in Emily's position? Would you have confronted Mark or let your work speak for itself? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe. See you in our next story.